You're listening to God, Law, and Liberty with David Fowler and Gary Humble. We're putting culture on a collision course with the truth.
All right, welcome to another episode of God, Law, and Liberty. I'm Gary.
And I'm David.
We got it right that time.
I remembered who I was.
It was fantastic.
That was good.
And we're excited to continue this conversation we had from episode 1 about where does authority come from. And I think we sort of kind of opened that can of worms, right, David?
Yeah, we did. But somewhere in all of society, there must be some place or principle of authority. And so we have to figure what that place of authority is. And if we don't figure it out, we'll go through life not knowing how to solve our problems. And that's how we really started the other day.
Yeah.
Because the very first question you have to really solve in order to have society is, where does authority lie?
Right.
Because we do, as you said yesterday, we can't just always stay in our own little lane and never intersect or never bump into the other person. And then the question becomes, well, who says I should give way to you? And you say, well, who says I shouldn't give way to you? And there
right.
we are.
And the ultimate goal is here, at least in America, is as part of that, we want liberty, we want freedom. So the idea now is we understand that we've got all of these factions and we're different and we've got all of these divisive ideologies and whatnot. So how in the midst of all of that chaos do we carve out a place for liberty? How does liberty live and breathe here?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think you put the word factions and liberty together, and you came up with Viberty or something. And I thought, that's a good new word, factious liberty. Way to go. It was heard first on God, Law, and Liberty.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, that is the really big question. And what's happened in our country, as we talked yesterday, Tocqueville made the statement that if the lights that guide us ever go out, then we'll be left with procedures, wise procedures, but we don't understand why they are the way they are. We won't know how to use them. We'll make a clumsy use of them. And we could get so far removed from our understanding of them that we're unable to invent new ways. We're unable to reform them because we don't know what they should be formed to, and we don't know how to move forward with those forms, so to speak. So what we do is we turn into revolution. And we just say, well, we just got to get rid of everything. So everything gets thrown away. That was the French Revolution.
Right.
We got corruption between the state and the church. So what do? We just overthrow them all.
Right.
And then eventually they turned on themselves. And, that's already happening in the left in our country where, everybody's so politically correct. And the next thing you know, somebody who's trying to be politically correct isn't politically correct. And they, like Robespierre, they cut his head off too.
Yeah.
So we've got to address this issue, whether we like it or not. And our founders tried to address it. And as I was just saying that, I thought of your introduction to the fact that we're going to do this podcast. You talked about the fact that we had bricks. Mm-hmm. You might want to just tell your three little pig story quickly.
3 Little Pigs.
Yeah, but it relates to that.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, you've got this nursery rhyme we learn story we learn as young children that this house made of bricks and mortar is strong. It withstands the wiles of the enemy, the wolf, right?
That's right.
And I look at our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, and I think, those are bricks. Those are really strong bricks. But today, we've so much lost the understanding of what a brick is over decades and decades. That now we're not building with brick anymore. And I gave the analogy that we're building with sticks and straw, and sometimes today I feel like whipped cream.
Sure.
This whole idea that the bottom line is that the way that we interpret the Constitution, and you just look at Congress, it's hard to find someone in Congress today that you feel like really understands what the Constitution means and what the framers understood those precepts to mean in the Constitution. Right. And we aren't building with bricks anymore, and that's a dangerous place. Obviously, if you start building a house with bricks and then later on you start building with something else, there's an amount of instability that you begin to find in that structure.
That's right.
So we've got to get rid of all of that sticks and straw and all that mess, and we've got to start building with bricks again.
That's right. And then what you do is you take those key principles and you can reform them or expand them or adapt them to the current circumstances. But revolution just says throw everything away. We don't like the whipped cream; it's not working. The straw, the sticks are not working. But they also throw away the foundation. See, that was the French Revolution. The American Revolution was not that. It really wasn't even a revolution. In fact, Winston Churchill said, Edmund Burke, the great English statesman at the time of the War for Independence, said, this really isn't a revolution. What the Americans are doing is reclaiming the rights they have as Englishmen that we have begun to infringe upon and take away. So America didn't say, we're going to start all over. They said, we're going to reclaim those things that over time and over history, through our understanding and development of law and government, we're going to reclaim those things and assert them against you. And if you don't give them to us, then we will declare our independence. And that's exactly what they did. So we've lost that notion.
Which is also why when they came and they wrote the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, that's very much they didn't start from scratch. They essentially implemented a lot of the English common law,
sure.
As the basis for what we know as our law today.
Sure. Actually, our listeners are going to hear this word common law a lot over the next several weeks. One, we need to make sure we know what it is. But in relation to that, let me explain it and then talk about the alternative that was offered to us that we rejected. America is called a common law jurisdiction. I think all states are common law jurisdictions except for Louisiana.
Except for Louisiana, my home state.
That's right.
We're a Napoleonic code.
Yes, that's right. You're a code, and that's very important. You're a civil law, not a common law state. Now, what is the common law? Common law are those sets of customs and beliefs and traditions that have developed over periods of time, long periods of time. And in fact, they say that the weight of them, the lawness of them, is derived from the fact that these things go to a time to which memory runs not to the contrary. We've done this so long, it has proven to be work that, the Scripture says, don't depart from the ancient paths. We've learned certain things over hundreds of years and lots of wars and lots of blood. And we've built on those things, and we've refined those things, and we've clarified those things, and we've figured out how liberty relates to law, and law and liberty relate to religion and relate to speech, and we put all those things together. And so that was the common law, okay? The civil law, or the Napoleonic Code, was the idea that, no, we start from scratch. Out of our heads, we make up what the law was. Now, there was a guy at the time of the founding of this country named Jeremy Bentham, and he was one of those new law thinkers that man made the law. Man didn't receive a law from a transcendent source and try to discern it and figure it out through reason and revelation and history and trial and error. No. We just make it up because we're the Enlightenment creatures. And so he offered to make for the United States a Napoleonic Code where all the law would be written down. And we said, no. We're not going to do that. So there was actually a huge fight in the early years of our country between a guy named Thomas Jefferson, who many people have heard of, and another guy named Joseph Story. Joseph Story was the youngest person ever nominated to serve on the United States Supreme Court. And he was on the Supreme Court. He was essentially, some would say, the intellectual brains behind the first Chief Justice Marshall. And he taught at Harvard for many, many years. He wrote the first commentary on the United States Constitution, Story's commentaries on the Constitution. A brilliant jurist. And he and Jefferson fought all the time. And originally, Story won. We are a common law people. We don't believe in abstract notions of rights, that they are grounded in truths and realities that we have discovered and learned over time. And so he won. But now, today, we would say, in some ways, he's lost because we actually think rights come from the Supreme Court, from decisions of the Supreme Court. They don't come from outside of us; they come from us.
Yeah. So if we could kind of dissect that right there just for a moment, because you and I, we've had conversations about these rights and duties and inalienable rights, and I think what Story was arguing there with the common law is that the common law hearkens to, our inalienable rights, a set of rights that we have that are pre-constitution, that are pre-law, that exist outside of what we call positive law, which is laws that us as humankind make.
Yeah, we posit them.
Yeah, right. And those positive laws are different in that we begin to assign rights to each other per positive law. And those rights we have by positive law, and those rights, those inalienable rights that we have, are two completely separate things. Can we just talk about that for a moment?
Sure. I mean, the reality is you can have no God-given rights without God.
Right.
I mean, by definition of terms, but you can have no inalienable rights if there is an ability to alienate them. So,
that's
I mean,
really
and that's sort of
which we're trying really, really hard to do in our society.
yeah,
today.
that's right. But it sounds like a tautology. Well, you can't have inalienable rights unless the source is inalienable. But if the people, a majority of the people, give you a certain right, then as things change, that same group of majority can change their mind.
Mm-hmm.
Or parts of that majority can join the minority, and then you no longer have those rights. They've been alienated. So what we're really dealing with in this country, and I think it's so fascinating, we yell and scream all the time, my rights, my rights, my rights, and it's kind of like, well, where are they? So let me share a little conversation.
Mm-hmm.
As I left the legislature in 2006, I was out in the parking lot of a television station. I'd been arguing with a person who championed the notion of abortion, the right to abortion. We were in the process of trying to pass a constitutional amendment to say, in Tennessee's Constitution, there is no right to abortion. So during the television show, we were having a television show, like this, and this person kept saying, well, I have a right to abortion, I have a right to abortion. And I kept saying, well, let's talk about the nature of the act we're doing, what it is we're aborting, and then we can talk about the ethics of the act. Well, that person didn't want to engage. They didn't want to engage in that conversation. So in the parking lot, I said, I really was being serious. I said, where do you have this right such that I am under a moral duty? Because a right should imply a duty on somebody's part. We've lost that notion too.
If you have a right, then someone also has a duty to uphold it.
Yes, or not interfere with it.
Right.
Right. So rights and duties, we've separated those in our current culture. At the common law, we didn't. We understood the reason you have a right is because somebody's under a duty. I said, so why am I under a moral obligation not to amend the Constitution to say there's nothing about abortion in it? And I said, now understand, you can't say because the Constitution gives me the right, because the Constitution says I have the right to abolish it. So if your right is in that document and I have the right to abolish it, your right evaporates with that document's abolishment. And why is it morally wrong for me to abolish that Constitution or abolish that right? And the person looked at me with honesty and she said, I'm not sure I understand what you mean. And I said, well, what I mean is that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. If rights don't come from outside of us, they can only come from us. One of us, some of us, all of us. We were talking about that yesterday.
If they come from us,
then us can take them away.
We can change them at any time.
That's right. And I said, so by definition, your group, her organization, excludes God from the public square and any debate about public policy. It's all an establishment of religion. So I said, so you exclude the only basis upon which you can assert a true moral right, impose on me a moral duty not to change the Constitution. So I said, what you have is an opinion, you have a position, but you do not have a right in any real true sense of the word. And the person was, to be honest, rather just kind of, well, I hadn't thought about it. And so I sent the person this law review article we were talking about the other day by the professor from Yale that wrote in the Duke Law Journal. And saw the person a few years later and said, yeah, I read it. I just don't believe that. Well, you can just choose to believe the sun doesn't shine too if you want to, but it's out there. So we have to address this issue. And we don't want to address that issue because we do like our liberty. And again, this is why we call this God, law, and liberty. If you don't get the authority question, is there a God or is there not a God? Then everything else follows from that. Now, one thing you and I've talked about a lot here is people will say, well, wait a minute, I don't believe in God. So now you're establishing religion, you're injecting religion into government. That's an establishment of religion, and that's unconstitutional, so you're free to believe that, but you can't let that influence your public policy, your understanding of law. Our founders would have said, well, that's ridiculous. You need to get you a white jacket with long sleeves that tie in the back. And here's where it was made clear to me. I wrote a commentary back in June of last year, 2018, after the Masterpiece Cake Shop, and I think I've shared this with you, but I had this person write me and said, I read your commentary, and I made a statement, I wish I had it in front of me, where I said, to hold that those who do not believe in God, or those who believe that God has no relationship to law and policy, are entitled to bring their views about God to the public square, but I'm not entitled to bring my views to the public square, which are different, but they're all beliefs about God. They're all beliefs about God, is the height of religious discrimination. Now, this person wrote me and said, and it's turned out I count this person a friend. There's probably
you mean you have a friend that you disagree with?
Yeah. And sometimes
it's amazing.
Sometimes I call her my wife, but in this case it isn't my wife. But yeah, no, we have deep, wonderful conversations. I love them. I look forward to them. Politically, legally, theologically, there's probably very little we agree on. I think we agree there's a God, and probably that God's in the beginning somehow, But I dearly care for this person, and I would say in a sense I love this person, not as I love my wife or my children, but I do. But that statement caught her because she said, "You're absolutely right. I've never thought about it. I've thought about that all day long." So those who say, "Well, you need to keep God out of the conversation," you're welcome to have it on your podcast, of course, but don't bring it into the legislative chambers. Don't bring it into any political meeting or public policy debate. Well, they need to get over themselves because they bring their own views, their own reckoning about God and whether he exists or doesn't exist and what's the nature of God and what's the relationship of God to the world into the debate themselves.
Yeah, their belief of a lack of existence of God is
a belief
about God.
That's right. So they need to get over themselves. Now, one of the things, we never know where we're going to go, but you remember yesterday I shared with you a section of the Tennessee Constitution.
Yeah, which basically says to be a legislator in the state, you have to believe in God.
Yeah. I mean,
I wish we would actually abide by that.
Yeah, it's Article 9, Section 2 of the Tennessee Constitution, and it's not an unusual provision for constitutions that were written.
Oh, I have it right here in front of me.
Just quote it.
Yeah,
this is in the Tennessee Constitution.
Article 9, Section 2. No person who denies the being of God or a future state of rewards and punishments shall hold any office in the civil department of this state.
Yeah, the word any.
Any, yeah. Zero, none.
Yeah. So today we say, Fowler, if you can't leave your religious beliefs outside the door to the Senate chamber where you serve, you're not eligible to serve. You can't represent people. Our founders said, are you crazy? Because here's the problem.
Which it sounds to me, it's almost like if you're dumb enough to believe there's not a God, you have no business leading this state. This is kind of the way it's worded.
Well, that's right. But let me help explain how I always took that. And I've said this to people many times. I said it on the House floor after I retired. I had a chance to speak, and I put this up. I said, look, here's what our founding fathers understood. If you believe you are only accountable to the voters and only for what the voters may know that you've done, then you are scary to me. I want the person who lives and operates in the fear of God in a state of eternal rewards and punishments, because God knows everything you do, and he will have a great accounting of everything that you do. And see, I spoke those words on the House floor not long after, actually after I retired, but not long after the Rocky Top scheme. Because we had people taking money under the table, and some had been doing it for years. And the voters never knew about it.
Which they may have not done had they actually believed there would have been an eternal consequence to that action.
That's right. Yeah, an eternal one. They might not have done. So our founding fathers said the man who's only accountable to other men and only to other men to the extent other men know what they're doing, we don't trust you because the heart is deceitful and wicked beyond all things, and you can justify and rationalize everything. And so we flipped everything on its head in our country, and that's a problem. So anyway, my point in bringing this up is we all have to have some understanding of authority. That authority has to grapple with, is there a God or not a God? That's the first question. Everything else flows from that fact. Now, we may live terribly inconsistent with what we say, but everything we do is premised on somehow our understanding of God and our relationship of God to ourselves, to our society, to the world, to nature. All of that's influenced by our understanding of God. We may live inconsistently with it, but that's the challenge. That's what I hope we can do on this show, is to say, if you believe certain things, then these things naturally follow.
Which our framers understood. You know, what's interesting about, because what we're saying is that at the end of the day, it's better, and it should be the case that our law is grounded in what we call natural law, which understands that law comes from God, and we have these inalienable rights. And as much as the founders believed that wholeheartedly to be true, they structured our government in such a way that still left room for people who don't.
That's right.
And we are missing that today. And what I want to put forward is it's this idea of the fact that we are a republic and not a democracy, because we mentioned last episode this idea of that we have factions. Well, we have factions because we all believe different things, and our republic is set up so wonderfully because it allows for those things. And I think about, like these two major issues that we are heavily involved in right now in our state, over abortion and over marriage. And we have these two Supreme Court, and I think this speaks brilliantly to this, we have these two Supreme Court decisions, one being the Roe v. Wade decision, and the second being the 2015 Obergefell v. Hodges decision, both of which essentially what the court did is took away the rights of a state to have its own opinion. And so what happened there is the federal court decided we're not going to allow for a republic anymore. We're not going to allow for a difference of opinions. We're not going to allow for a state, which is a dual sovereign, to govern itself, and for a group of people to govern itself. We're going to now tell you what's right and wrong. And that to me, those two decisions from the court are completely antithetical to everything that this country was founded upon, of us being a republic. And that's why I believe they need to be overturned just on grounds of what I believe about God. But they need to be overturned simply because they're unconstitutional.
Yeah, they're contrary to the very nature and function and reasons for our government. And as I said yesterday, Justice Kennedy, beginning in 1992 in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which was the next biggest case after really Roe versus Wade, started talking about individual autonomy. And we talked yesterday that the word autonomy is the word self-law, auto and nomos, the Greek words for self and law. And the notion of autonomy as a basis for law is chaos, because it says everybody is a law unto themselves. And we know that can't work. We know that can't work. So Justice Kennedy tried to be this philosopher king that Plato was looking for, and exposed his own ignorance of history, of the experience of man, of philosophy, of theology. He exposed his ignorance, and we have people who praise him that he's for individual autonomy, which is not a basis for an organized society. Period. And nobody's thought that way. We talked about de Tocqueville the other day, the French philosopher and sociologist who came to America. And he said, look, every society, I brought this quote just in case we ran into it, but he made this statement that under no circumstances will dogmatic belief cease to exist. In other words, men will never cease to entertain some opinions on trust without discussion. You're going to have something that you're going to have to believe in that you can't prove by reason. Reason is not a source of truth. It is a means at which we can arrive at the truth, but you have to accept the premise in order to reason. Well, you can't prove the premise by reason. You have to prove the premise by some other point, and you get into an infinite regression. So consequently, you have to accept some things dogmatically.
And you can't reason with someone who doesn't accept the same premise.
Yeah, and you can't reason with someone that doesn't agree that some premise somewhere has to be accepted on dogmatic faith. It all does. So then he goes on and he says, but without a common belief, no society can prosper. Why? Because we have to live together. And our founders realized, you read a great statement the other day in Federalist Paper 10, where he said, the reality is we're just every man for himself. Essentially, I don't remember the exact quote, but it was great. It was,
he was
talking
saying
about the factions.
The only way to there's two ways to get rid of the factions. One is to get rid of liberty.
Yeah.
The second one is to just force everyone to think the same thing.
Yeah. And so what has the Supreme Court started to do?
You got that
So
number. Exactly.
You can't think differently about abortion in America. You can't think differently about marriage in America. We don't mean to disparage any other beliefs. You just can't operate.
You just can't have them.
You just can't. Yeah, as a effective matter, you can't have them because what we believe determines our actions. Our actions don't determine what we believe. Our actions flow out of what we believe. Out of the heart, the man speaks. Out of the heart, the man acts. So he's saying you can have your belief, but not really. Because and here's the other thing that gets lost, and we'll return to this theme a lot. The law is a moral tutor. It has an educative component.
As a teacher, yes.
It's a teacher. That's a biblical concept, but it's also found in our legal pleadings. When same-sex couples file their lawsuit to say your marriage law is wrong, I just counted the number of times they say the law teaches, the law sends a message, the law instructs. So over time, as the law indicates that this is good, we begin to think, well, that must be good. If it says it's bad, well, it must be bad. And everybody believes that the law should affirm the good and punish the evil. Everybody. Nobody ever came into me as a state senator over 12 years, meetings galore every day, 4 or 5 months out of the year, just all the time, and said, this is terrible, bad public policy consequences. This is an evil thing. Would you vote for it? Nobody ever said that. The question is, what's good, what's evil, and who defines what's good and what's evil?
It's part of, I'll just say this, it is part of what really, irritates, frustrates, aggravates, I'm going to use all those words, disappoints me in the church today, is that a lot of church people today are just, this politics isn't my business.
Yeah,
Law isn't my business. We're just supposed to love people and preach the gospel. And yes, we absolutely are supposed to love people, all people, everybody, and preach the gospel, no doubt about it. But to deny that there is a role for faith to play in politics is ludicrous because, like you just said, law educates. If a law allows something to be true, then whether you like it or not, it's natural for every generation to grow up believing that no matter what you're saying in the church, if this is lawful, well, then it's good.
Yeah, that's
because how would the law wouldn't allow something that's not good? I mean, that's just how we grow up. What is allowed in our culture and what is taught that is against the law is bad. Oh, well, that's against the law. I shouldn't do that thing. It's not a good thing to do. That we create a culture. And if the church is okay with, in one, creating a culture that communicates a completely different set of rights and wrongs compared to what we're teaching our children in the church, that is ludicrous to me that we would be okay with that. I'm not okay with that.
Yeah. It's it's interesting. I've been thinking recently about the place of the law in Scripture. And Paul, what did Paul say? Paul said the purpose of the law was to increase sin. By its righteousness, it convinced me more and more how sinful I was. And he said, in fact, I wouldn't have known coveting if it hadn't been for the law said, thou shalt not covet. And I thought, what does covet mean? And then he went, oh my goodness, I covet all the time. I wish I could be like Stephen, and I'm not like Stephen. I was standing there trying to help people stone Stephen. He had something I don't have. I covet. Oh my goodness. And so to sit here and say we just want to evangelize, we want to share the gospel, but we don't care if the law teaches everybody that murder's okay and everything, all these things are okay. You're making the job of evangelism harder.
Incredibly difficult.
Yes. So it's a dualistic, divided worldview. And I hate to say this, but those who oppose the values the church espouses understand the educative aspect of the law better than the people who are of the book of the law.
Absolutely.
It is damnable that is the case.
They know that the laws that they are passing, in essence, are destroying religion. They're destroying faith in this country.
Sure, they're undermining faith.
We see
all the time.
It's undeniable in the numbers that Christian faith is diminishing numerically in the United States.
Yeah,
undeniable fact.
Sure. And we undermine it at every turn. And then are surprised to find that it's undermined. It reminds me of C.S. Lewis, who said, we castrate and then bid the gelding be fruitful and multiply. So you're going to have laws that teach this is what marriage is like, this is what life means, this is what a person is, this is when you become a person. You have no inalienable rights. And then we're shocked.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah, but then we're shocked to find that the governor of New York wants to let people lay in Virginia on the little previously born babies just
and
lay
let
there
your
until
mom
they die.
decide if she wants to kill you or not.
Yeah, and
crazy.
And why are we shocked by that? Because our law's been teaching everybody that for years. In fact, in the 1992 case of Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the abortion decision we've mentioned a few times, I'll try to get this quote exactly right, but this is pretty darn close. One of the reasons they said they could not reverse, they didn't justify that we got the law right to begin with, that we correctly understood what a person was and what his life was. They said for 2 decades, people have organized their lives and defined their existence in terms of define their existence and in reliance on abortion in the event contraception should fail. There are places in the world, their purpose of existence, and what they were saying, I often explain that to people. Hear what they're saying. For 20 years now, we've had this law that says you can go have sex, and if there is a consequence of it called pregnancy, you can get rid of it. Don't worry about it. And so we said, well, that must be okay. The law allows it. In fact, it's a constitutional right to do it. And so people began to reorder their understanding of themselves and their places in the world. That's the phrase they use, by saying the sexual powers were not given for an expression of union and unity in a marital relationship. They were not given for the end or the telos or the purpose of procreation. They're just given for mere sensual pleasure.
Given for my own enjoyment to do with what I please.
That's right. And so sex lost all sense of dignity and honor and meaning beyond just sensual pleasure. And so after a while, it's kind of like babies interfere with my career. Babies interfere with my education. Babies interfere with my relationship with my boyfriend. So see, being able to have abortion helps redefine my understanding of who I am and my place in society.
I'll just say this: our time is running up, and we're gonna it's gonna be really fun to get into the next episode. But on that note, I just feel led to say, I'm 41 now, and my wife and I turned 40, and it was. I remember that day. It was so crazy. We were sitting around. My 2 older boys were finally going to both be in school, and my wife and I were sitting in our living room, and we were talking about like what she was going to do with all of this newfound freedom now. I mean, the boys are in school till 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. What are you going to do? This is going to be so much fun. Literally the next week after that conversation, she walks in the living room, just this shocked face. Gary, I'm pregnant. And here we are, we're 40. This is totally unplanned, so overwhelming emotions are just flooding you, because your whole world's getting turned upside down. And that night she went to bed. I usually kind of stay up a little bit later, and I'm just looking for resources and just what, I'm looking for some encouragement, I'm kind of like, oh my God, what am I, this is such a shock. And so I searched like pregnant and 40. David, I swear to you, everything that was coming up on Google was about abortion. I almost want to cry. I sat and I came really close to just weeping at the search results for pregnant and 40. Abortion, because, I'm done raising kids. It's my life now.
This is my place in society.
That's right. I'm not gonna start all over on this.
Yeah.
And my heart, I just wept for, and anyway. So my little Luke, he just turned a year a couple months ago, and I mean, just what a blessing God is sovereign, and He knows what we need if we will submit to that. And the joy that He brings in our home. I mean, his two older brothers think he's the most amazing thing in the world, and it's just changed our family for the better. And God knew, He knew.
Yeah.
So I just want to, that this whole idea that we live unto ourselves, that we know what's good for us, and we make our own decisions, and all of these things we're talking about. I wish people would get that there's just more going on than that. But again, right? Not everyone's going to believe that way, and that's why we have a republic.
Yes, there we go.
Because people live their lives differently, and we don't need a Supreme Court deciding what everybody needs to think.
Yeah.
In every state.
Yeah.
We'll get into that more next episode. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts. God, Law, and Liberty is a podcast of the Family Action Council of Tennessee. We are a 100% supporter-funded nonprofit advocating for family, life, marriage, and religious liberty. For more information, please visit us at www.facttennessee.org. That's FACTennessee.org. And please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram @FactTennessee.